Thank you, everybody. Can you hear us? These working?
Hello.
It's such an honor to be at the greatest bookstore in New York City.
Amen.
Anybody who comes here is a friend of mine, and so we're not professional talkers. We're supposed to be, but we'll try to keep this as informal as possible. I'll tell you how we came to be at the Strand bookstore together. Is a few years ago, I had an idea with my friend Ben Dickey, who's a musician. He was really struggling because his band had just broken up. And he was in a lot of pain about it because he'd invested himself entirely into believing in this music and this band. And he and I, for years, had often listened to Blaze Foley's music together and enjoyed listening to it. And it was a common refrain with us to play one of his songs or talk about it in some way or say, have you discovered a new song, and that kind of thing. And he was really sad one night about this band program. It was New Year's Eve. And I was saying to him, remember Blaze Foley. Like, remember that there are so many world-class artists all over the world working at a high level who haven't found a place in the commercial environment. Doesn't matter the art form. But Blaze, in a lot of ways, to Ben and I, was a symbol of somebody who was operating at a very high level, who never got met with much more than indifference, right? And so I started thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if Ben played Blaze in a movie? It was just a fleeting idea that when it happened, it felt a little bit like putting a paperclip in an electric socket or something, because it felt like, wow, that would be a great idea. The problem was I didn't know what the movie would be. You know, it was just an idea. And so my wife and I went down to Austin to do a little research about Blaze's life. And we met this man, Lewis Black, who had started the South by Southwest Film Festival. He'd started the Austin Chronicle. He's a wonderful journalist. And more than anything else, he's a true blue champion of the arts. And I said, hey man, I want to make a movie about Blaze Foley. What would the story be? And he said, well, have you read his wife's book? And I said, I didn't know, because if you know anything about Blaze, you're like, he had a wife? And he said, well, kind of he did. Read the book, you'll get it. And so my wife and I each got the book, and we both read it, underlining different passages, and I felt like you do when you read a good book. I felt like I had made a friend. I felt like I know this woman. I respect this person. I like the way they think. I want to talk to her. And so I called her up. And we started this endeavor that led to this movie coming out and led to us. They're doing a new reissue of the book, and it's here at the bookstore, and that's why we're here in front of you. How does it feel to be here and have the book coming out again and be here talking about it?
Well, it's wonderful to be here. I lived in New York from 1980 to 1990 for 10 years, and I came here all the time. So I'm like astonished to find myself sitting here, but I'm so grateful. So,
what was the process? Because I know you've been writing for a really long time, but or you've always been writing and enjoying writing. What brought you to revisit your relationship with Blaze via literature?
Well, I've been writing about Blaze since, feels like since the day we broke up. I mean, I wrote 2 plays about him in the 80s that I never really could finish because I didn't know what the ending was. But and then when I was kind of disconnected from his memory for a long time. At the same time, I was writing these plays, which maybe that's why I couldn't finish them. But and then in the 2002, the documentary film Blaze Foley, Duct Tape Messiah, some of you may have seen. So they called me for an interview, and I was living in upstate New York, and I said, well, maybe I have something to contribute. I don't know. It was also kind of dim for me, and then I said, but send me some of his music. I haven't heard him sing in such a long time. So they sent me Oval Room, and I don't know, I put it in the player, and it was like the first plunk. I immediately saw that flat pad of his thumb, you know, against the strings, and it just, I don't know if he rushed into me, he rushed out of me, but he was so present. And I think just from that moment, I knew that I was going to get another chance to write about Blaze Foley, and maybe this time I would just tell what actually happened and
make it a
see.
memoir rather than fictional. Because at first you're writing plays about it, fictionalizing the relationship.
Well, not only fictionalized, but idealized, sanitized. I mean, you know, I just kept reinventing him. It was like I wanted the story to come out differently somehow, but, you know. So then because I went back to Georgia to be interviewed for the documentary, then suddenly it was just, and
Georgia's where you fell in love. That's where
Right.
the treehouse was, where they fell in love.
yeah. So I can't even, you know, in The Year of Magical Thinking, Joan Didion, she talks about something called pathological grief, which, you know, is kind of a funny expression, but it says that it happens if you're very merged with your partner and then they die, or if your grief is delayed. And I think that's exactly what happened to me. Like, I didn't grieve for our breakup. I didn't grieve for his death. I was so removed from, you know, it was like I wasn't ready. I just wasn't ready. I think that has a lot to do with it. And so I just, you know how you do, you just keep going. And but now I was ready. And so I went back to Georgia to be interviewed, and we uncovered all these songs that he had written in the treehouse that he didn't, you know, play anymore. They weren't on records that were out, like the Oval Room. And all of that was just a tremendous affirmation of what had happened between us. And then when I rediscovered the Moonlight Song, that sort of gave me suddenly a structure for what I wanted to write about, you know, which was to tell our story, but also our story from the past, but then also what it was like to have this kind of grief and come back to, you know, a time and a place that you had seen so differently, you know, for so long, and to realize that, you know, I had this time with this person.
Tell everybody a little bit about, I was kind of amazed. Sybil got asked to be a part of this documentary, come down to Georgia, where they fall in love with the treehouse. And the treehouse was originally owned by a man.
It was owned by, well, the property that it was on was owned by our friend Joe Bucher, who had befriended Blaze. I knew him as Deputy Dog then. And he had befriended him over the love of John Prine.
I love John Prine. But what I'm interested is getting at the story of Glenn, which I find so magical and strange.
Right. So we were so lucky to land in this treehouse, which Joe Bucher offered us. And I just want to say that when we moved into it, it didn't have any walls. It was just this open platform and roofs, and, you know, and it was summer. And, you know, when you live in a house with no walls, you don't have neighbors, because everything is living with you. So it was a very wonderful, magical time. And so we were also part of this hippie community. And the patriarch of this hippie community was this fellow named Glenn, who was kind of a composite character in our movie. And Glenn, you know, I was with Deputy, he was married at the time, and but then when I went back to Georgia to sort of reclaim the memory of Blaze and the memory of being in love, there was Glenn. And so in the course of doing my research and writing, you know, working on the book,
You fell in love a second time.
I fell in love a second time from that same soil. That just
to me,
crazy.
it seems almost like Blaze introduced you to his pal Glenn.
Well, Blaze and Glenn were really good friends, and I think that Glenn, who's a little bit older than Blaze and I, he really felt like, you know, he didn't have real closure with Blaze, because towards the end of Blaze's life, he was pretty difficult, and they had an altercation, and he had left Georgia and gone back to Austin, and then about 6 months before Blaze died, he called Glenn. And, so they had some closure at that point. But then when Glenn and I got together, we were like, what is going on, And I was working on the memoir, and I was so confused during those first months of being in love with this ghost and falling in love with this real person, and that sometimes I would call Glenn Glaze. Like, completely confused. But Glenn was tolerant. He was happy to, I think he felt like us coming together was a way of healing all three of us. Yeah.
What was it like, the thing people often ask me about you is, what was it like when you first saw the finished movie?
Oh.
When did like this whole thing, I know that what I always answer is that there really wasn't that day, because you watched it. It's not like we weren't a part, we were never really apart. There wasn't a shot that you didn't basically see be filmed, and you were so a part of the evolution of the whole process. But I don't really know the answer to that question. When you watch a memoir you've written and you have to hand it over to another group of artisans to try to tell the same story in their way with you, what did that feel like?
You mean in the process of filming?
I guess I don't really know what I'm asking.
Okay.
I asked what it felt like to watch the movie, but I realized that there really wasn't, when you're there filming something, it's not like the movie just falls in your lap. You watched you're watching more, seeing what take I picked, because you saw, right? I mean,
I feel like being a part of that process was so, it was very healing. And I realized that, when you let something live in a new way, that is really the beginning of letting go. And so all of these years of coming to terms with this relationship, this man and his history and, his heartbreak, and then watching other people take it up with so much love and tenderness and respect, and, it just, it gave me another level of actually being able to let go, because when you let go, it's like when you let go, something comes back to you. So, but it's true. It's true. It comes back to you. It's so, I felt like when I was writing the memoir, I was like stitching his memory back into me. And so when you see other people take it up, then suddenly there's just like layers and layers and layers of memory and images, and it's all, it's that glaze thing, it's all mixed up in my head in a certain way, but it's okay, because that's what it's become.
One of the funniest situations was I had asked Sybil is also an actor, so I'd asked her to play her mother in the movie when we had to do a scene like that. And for a variety of reasons, it's not in the finished film, but the funniest thing was that the first thing I'd wanted her to do is that when her mother first meets Blaze, I wanted her to faint. And so the first thing you had to do was a pratfall.
It was perfect.
It was kind of like a Zen exercise of poking fun of yourself.
Well, and also, I was so nervous because I'd been watching all these wonderful actors, and I wanted to make them proud. And so I was so nervous, and then they pile up these mattresses behind you, you just fall backwards. And I drew on all those, trust exercises I did in the theater in the 60s, really, You had to do that so many times. And I just went back like an emery board. And when I hit the mattress, all my fear it just blew out of me. It was amazing. Like that impact just knocked it out. And I was calm.
As a director, I should do that all the time now, just make everybody fall down.
No, really, especially new actors. Absolutely.
I know.
Yeah.
What was it like playing your mother?
Very therapeutic. When we talked about it, you said, well, you won't really be doing a portrayal of your mother. You'll be playing the woman that serves the film.
Yeah, right.
And that was really a very liberating thing for me to hear, actually, because then I didn't know who that person would be.
It's the hard thing about making a movie that's when it ever says based on a true story. If you're making a reenactment, you're making something that's going to be pretty unwatchable. I mean, it's not. We live in an era of Wikipedia. You can know the facts. What our job was is to make art, right, and use it to tell a story. To use this memoir to lift it to make a movie. It's like. You can't do Romeo and Juliet as a ballet and still have it be a play. It has to be a ballet,
But I think I always understood that it wasn't going to be the same.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. So those weren't the things that if I had any impulse to protect or to defend, it wasn't that in any way. I think there were times when I felt like maybe something was being missed, and I was able to say to you, "What about this?" Yeah.
There was more here. There's an insight here. There's another little detail here. Does anybody? Should we ask for some questions?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions for us? Yeah.
Who else was one of his influences besides John Prine?
Oh God, that's a good question.
Who else was Blaze Foley's influences besides John Prine?
Well, he came from gospel. I mean, his family, they were gospel singers, itinerant gospel singers, and you should hear them sing. It's just remarkable.
We had an amazing experience in Austin. Blaze's sister, Marcia, came with her nephew,
right,
and they sang some gospel with Ben, and it was so beautiful.
Beautiful. So I think so much of his music, arose from that. But when he was a teenager and he was trying to teach himself to play the guitar, he would listen to Merle Travis, Chet Atkins, So and of course, he named himself after Red Foley. So he had that foundation. And I don't know, he introduced me to so much music. I think he was very influenced by Chris Christopherson.
It was a very
Guy Clark, if a songwriter, Kinky Friedman,
Yeah. It was a very fun moment. Marcia, his sister, brought his guitar to set the day that Christopherson worked. She brought Blaze's real guitar there and asked Chris if he would sign Blaze's guitar because she knew how much it would mean to him to have it. And it was pretty magical watching Chris sign it and thinking what Blaze would think.
Yeah. Well, talk about why you cast Chris. I think that's beautiful.
I think, first off, when you're making something about outlaw country music and you have a patriarch, a person who's supposed to be a patriarch in a movie, it seemed like it might be a beautiful thing to do to have somebody who could tip their hat to actually be an outlaw country legend, to actually, who could be Blaze Foley's dad, right? And I thought of Chris, but I also thought of Ben. I was asking all these people to be uncomfortable, whether I'm telling your story. I was asking Ben, who's a musician, Charlie Sexton, who's a musician, to play. The idea of the movie was to cast musicians as musicians, and that way the music could be authentic. That was something we were really hoping for. And Chris is kind of the tip of the spear of that. Is such a fine actor, such a fine musician, and to the point now when you think about him, you don't really isolate the art. You just think of Chris. This Sunday Morning Coming Down, or Me and Bobby McGee, and his performances as an actor, Pat Garrett and the Billy the Kid, they're all part of one energy, one. And I really wanted that for Ben, to believe in himself and to know that it wasn't a stunt, that this idea of art being more than one thing is not an idea, it's the truth. And so it was super wonderful. There is a funny story I could tell about in this environment. There's a line, and I think it's in the memoir, or maybe you just told it to me, but
that his father said. The line.
He should only open his mouth to change his feet, right? Apparently Blaze's father used to say that to him, and I said to. I had a kind of dream sequence in the movie where Chris was supposed to kind of look at the camera and say, "You should only open your mouth to change your feet," And Chris came to set. He said, "I don't get it." And I said, "Well, it's kind of a malaprop. It's kind of, the way fathers make sons feel bad. Why would they do that? I said, well, they do. Well, I don't like it. Doesn't make sense and it's mean. Like, well, I think Blaze's father was kind of mean. Well, I don't think it makes sense. I'm like, I don't want it to make sense. It's supposed to not make sense?
It's a dream.
Yes. You want it to not make sense. And it's like, yeah. He goes, well, then it's a good line. And so it was a great experience having him there for everybody. Yeah.
I wondered if you could talk about duct tape.
In what form?
So, a running monologue on duct tape.
Well, Blaze is known as often as the duct tape messiah because he began repairing his shoes and then his clothes and his guitar, and then he had a tuxedo made out of duct tape that he called the duxedo. But I do want to say in front of all of you, since you've met Glenn, that I was there the first time that Blaze saw, the healing power of duct tape, because he saw Glenn repair his sweatpants with duct tape, and that was it. After that, he was off and running.
My favorite was he had a Nike swoosh in duct tape on his cowboy boots, which is kind of an awesome vision.
I mean, I think part of the legend is that after Urban Cowboy came out and people were putting on these silver lapels and silver tips, and he started doing that with duct tape. But there is a prehistory to that also.
Yeah.
So you mentioned about how the story changed. There's some creative license from the book to the movie. How much did you have to change to package everything from life to the book?
That's an interesting question.
Good question.
Well, I think more of the changes came, you should never write a memoir and publish it when you're still alive. Seriously, because a lot of the changes that I had to make in the story had to do with, I kind of felt like I'm putting people in this story. They need to read it. First of all, I need to know if they're going to sue me. And then, so then people were, some people were like, no, take me out of this. I don't want to be in this story. And then some people were like, why isn't there more of me in this story? Seriously.
Yeah.
So those kind of changes, I think, and then, there are some things that will always be secret. That's just true.
Did you have to do some fudging to get, in other words, did you combine events to make one event together? Or, something?
No, I didn't. I tried. First of all, I had to unearth the narrative because there were pieces of it I didn't remember. And I was like stealing memories left and right because people would tell me stories. I'm like, oh, right. And then I couldn't remember. When we went from Georgia to Austin, we went to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, and I could not remember how did we get to, from New Orleans to Austin, and then I began to remember about the hitchhiking and the people that we met and the things that happened, and so it's more of sort of bringing it up than, taking it apart.
There was a guy at a screening in Austin who raised his hand and said that he'd gone he'd taken you and Blaze skinny dipping, right?
Well, we did not skinny dip, and that's true, because Blaze was afraid of water.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Right.
So he didn't go in the water, and so I was a good girlfriend, and I didn't go in the water either. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What was the casting process like to find Sybil, to find an actress that was going to play?
Yeah. It's very interesting thing to do, especially when we were first getting to know each other. I mean, it's such a scary thing to do, to give a memoir over to a director. I mean, it's such an act of faith, and I'm writer enough to know what I was asking and how hard that was, and finding the right actor to play Sybil was so important. First of all, because Blaze is a very flawed guy. As far as like, you go down to Austin, you meet people that really, why are you making a movie about that asshole? I mean, you would get that, and then you meet somebody else that go, Blaze was the sweetest. Don't listen to him. That guy, Blaze is mean to him because he's a jerk, you know? And you know, I mean, and you're like, what is going on? But point is, whose eyes are we looking at Blaze? I mean, any one of us, you could make a movie about you and see it from your mom's, if your mom made it. That's,
Please don't make that movie.
yeah, but, or a different lover, or your best friend from high school, or somebody who is just a journalist who's interviewing the wrong, you know,
Right.
there's so many different points of view on any one of us. I mean, the facts are the facts, but they're malleable on opinion and point of view.
Yeah.
And whose eyes we were looking at were Sybil's eyes, and I needed an actor whose eyes we trusted. Like when you read Sybil's book, one of the things that I love about it is the more I got to know her, the more I wanted to make this movie. The more I liked Blaze, the more I liked Deputy, the more I liked, you know, the more I came to, the same with Gerf, the same with Marcia. Gerf is one of his good friends and musical collaborators. You could see through you, the similarities of the people who love him. Mm-hmm. You can start to see the shadow person. They started to step forward. And because there's nothing much more fun than hanging out with you and Gerf talking for a long time. And the stories they tell and the references, and you just think, oh, I really like these people. And so you start to realize that I really like Blaze. And so who we cast, I needed a woman whose eyes we trusted. That even though if he's behaving badly, it's a good person behaving badly. Somebody who should be forgiven, somebody who I should give a second chance. You know, and if I don't trust that actor, I don't have that. I think she's the secret to the movie. In fact, you know, I mean, she's the life's blood of it. The movie, like Blaze's life, a lot of times wanders without it. You know, it's a little shapeless without that relationship. Tougher for me to navigate as a storyteller, you know. And so Alia, my wife found Alia. I only think of people that I've worked with before. It's always what happens to me. I just think of and I didn't know who we were writing for or who it was going to be. And one day I was working and I came back and my wife had made a little, links, to this episode from this TV show, this interview, this little clip from this movie, and just all these series of watch her in this scene, watch her in this scene. I was like, all right, she's it. And then mysteriously, I wanted to meet her, but I was working so hard prepping the movie that I couldn't go to LA. I just didn't have any time. And I needed her to come to New York, and she was busy working, she couldn't. And I was like, oh no, but I think this is such a good idea. So we Skyped. In the Skype, we're Skyping, and it's about 4:30. And the Skype thing comes up, and she lights a cigarette. She's like, sorry, I just woke up. And I was like, all right, this is good so far. And I said, look, I'm going to be sending you this memoir. I'm making this movie. I don't really even have a script yet. It's about the life of Blaze Foley. And there's the lead of the movie is somebody we're going to be telling it through your eyes. And I don't really have a script yet, but we're going to start in like 8 weeks. And so I'm really hoping that you'll keep yourself available, because I might not have a script really quickly before we start shooting. And she's like, Blaze Foley? Clay Pigeon's my favorite song. And most 25-year-olds don't know who Blaze Foley is, right? And I was like, well, great. Well, then maybe you'll give us a shot. She goes, I won't give you a shot. I'll do the movie. Sounds great. Yeah, and things don't really happen like that. I was like, whoa, hold on. I just want you to know that the guy playing Blaze has never acted before. Oh, that's cool. Like most actors would be like, wait a second. Why would I be co-starring without Daniel Day-Lewis or something like that? She's like, that sounds like a good idea. I want to hear some of his music. And I was like, okay. She writes me back, his music is awesome. I'm definitely in. And my wife called, because she was producing the movie, my wife called their agents and like, we know nothing about this. And I texted her, I was like, is this, they say they know nothing about this. Like, don't worry about them. I'll be there. Don't worry. I'll deal with them. And it was great. She did a great job. So, yeah.
Mr. Hawke, you've been a writer yourself, and what was your vision when you went through her book, and how did it change when she came on board during the whole filmmaking?
There was no movie without. Yeah, I will. He's asking me how my vision changed when I came to the book, right? there was no vision before the book. I'd had a very, for lack of a better word, a kind of you know how you said you didn't know whether he came into you or out of you? That fall, I had been away from home a lot. And when I have trouble falling asleep, you know, we now live in this amazing thing where you can I YouTubed Oval Room, right? And it just, the Outhouse tapes. And it just played him on repeat. And I had a lot of trouble falling asleep. And I would listen to him sing these songs with so much heart and hear people spilling beer in the background and people shooting pool. And it felt like a play to me. I felt like, I find it so moving. A month later, he was shot and killed. And if he didn't do this, we wouldn't have these songs. And if people didn't save it, I was so moved by the existence of the tapes, you know? And it did feel like a drama. And I think the reason why I first thought Ben could do it is I didn't think I was going to ask him to do that much acting. I kind of thought I might reenact the Outhouse performance. That was all I had, you know? And I even think I told you that on the phone. I was like, I kind of had thought about this, but now that I've read your book, I don't want to do that anymore. This story here is so much more interesting than I thought. And Sybil's book has a relationship to time that really interests me. And I wanted to use in the movie that oddly, Ben says it best, but you talk about it in your book. The memoir uses these songs, like you brought up the Moonlight song. It uses these songs they're time travelers, these songs. You know, if you're 14 years old and you listen to Hey Jude, right? You have no idea what the song means, but you find it really moving. And you want to listen to it over and over again. And then you fall in love and you play it for your girlfriend, right? And you guys listen to it over and over. It's part of your love affair. And then you break up and it comes on the radio and you turn it off, right? You don't want to hear that song. Then 10 years go by and it comes on the radio and you turn it back up. And it's like, and the song is exactly the same, but your relationship to it. And that to me is the best example of the past doesn't go anywhere. It's not even the past. You know, it's at Faulkner line and I thought, wow, what if we made a movie that really dealt with time the way, like past, present, future as a braid, as everything that happens right now has the past in it, has the future in it, and is in fact right hammered to this moment, and then this one. And if I could and I felt like from your book that you would like the movie that was happening, I was starting to see, and that we could use these songs as fence posts and dive in and out of time and make sense out of it. Am I getting the high sign? Are we doing okay? Okay. And so there really, it was our vision. And by ours, I even mean Alia affected it. Ben affected it. Steve Cousins, our cinematographer, would say things all the time. Like, I remember there's a famous story, it's in your memoir, and it's part of the Blaze Foley legend, is that he wrote, "If I Could Only Fly," you know, on the way back to Chicago with planes taking off. And I was like, and I went location scouting for an airport, and Steve was like, "This is so corny." I'm like, "What do you mean it's corny?" He's like, "If I could only fly and planes taking off." I don't want to, it's so literal. Everything we're doing is so much more interesting than that. And I was like, "Well, it really happened." "Yeah, well, they really tied their shoes. I don't want to show it. You know, I want to have insight into it, you know?" And I was like, that's a good point. You know, and so, I mean, I think that that's the great thing about making movies versus writing, is you get to bounce off other artisans. You know, you get to have a set designer say, "I think this wall should have polka dots on it," and that speaks to the movie. So, makes sense?
Oh, yeah.
All right, yeah.
You recently played Chet Baker in a movie. How do you find representing real life people as an actor versus a director?
Well, that's a great question. He's asking me about playing Chet Baker, which is a lot of why I think we're here. When I had played Chet Baker, but I couldn't play the trumpet. And the more I talked to people that knew him and loved him, said, well, you know, the way he played the trumpet was his primary relationship. You know, like that was his secret inner self. You know, wives hard, kids hard, record companies hard. I mean, trumpet, great, you know, and I couldn't touch that. As an actor, I couldn't get near that. I could practice the trumpet till my eyes turned blue. I was never gonna have an artistic relationship, a spiritual relationship to it. Like when you said the first thing you thought when you heard the music, you saw the thumb. Right? Ben talks about his thumb. When Ben was learning the things, he kept saying he's got a flat thumb. He's always hitting, you know, it's like Mississippi John Hurt or Lightning Hop. He plays like built in the back of the blues musicians, you know? And so that's where I think the idea, I think when I finished Born to Be Blue, I thought if I ever made a movie about a musician, I'll cast musicians. All right, well, I think, should we, why don't we do this? Yeah, last question.
Just like to shoot off, I really like your work in Gattaca back in the day. And like as a director, you know, trying to touch in on like a raw element of art, something untouchable. Unsellable doesn't matter if it's successful or not. What's it like going down in the deep south? You know, as Mr. kind of Hollywood and as a director, and you're going in the deep south in Georgia with people with guns and a whole lot of.
Where are you from?
Australia.
Australia. Well, they got guns in Australia, and they got mean-ass insects there too. I find.
Yeah. So, like, how does it feel, and how did you like sort of humble down and get in touch with good people?
First of all, I don't walk around with a thing on my back called Mr. Hollywood, you know? I mean, how did I do it?
How did you do?
You know, the truth is that I'm from Austin, Texas, and I love this music.
He is Southern.
And so this is in my blood, and I love it. And Gattaca, you know, what you started with, one of the things I sat walking around here with the writer-director of Gattaca, Andrew Nichol, the weekend it came out. And that movie came out, we couldn't find one review good enough to put a quote on the poster, you know? And he was heartbroken. I mean, he killed himself on this. And when I say the Blaze Foleys of the world, what I found so moving about your book and people operating at a high level, just because the world doesn't kiss your ass or just, you know, doesn't mean you're not doing vital and valuable work for the world in the arts. That we're all a part of a consciousness, and Blaze is a part of it, and you don't know when your work's going to come out, and you don't know how the book is going to affect people, and you think the book is done, and before you know it, it has a movie being made about it. You know, I mean, we don't know, and that's one of the things I love about art. It's so mysterious. And you can learn about it anywhere. You know, you talk about the South. You can learn. I've seen people come to acting in prison. Some phenomenal writing has happened in prison all over the world.
But also, in defense of the South, I just want to say that, I mean, you look at Blaze Foley. I mean, he's progressive. He's smart. You know, he understood how the world worked. He didn't carry a gun. We're not all one thing in the South.
I mean, you know, Willie, no, thank you. Yeah, it's why to make the movie, you know, part of why I wanted Blaze in front of American flag the whole time is a little bit of reclaiming that iconography. That iconography doesn't mean one thing. The flag of Bohemia runs through the South. And radical thinkers. I mean, Willie Nelson's been driving a bus run on peanut oil forever, talking against gun violence and everything. So why don't we, we'll sign books, we'll sign whatever you all want, we'll talk amongst ourselves, and we'll have a wonderful evening.
Thank you
Thank
so
you guys
much.
for coming out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sybil Rosen.
Thank you, Ethan Hawke.